Picture this. You're scrolling through TikTok, Reddit's philosophy communities, through Twitter philosophy discourse, and what do you see? Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, Aristotle, and probably some Nietzsche, if people are feeling a little edgy. Dostoevsky gets quoted constantly. Now, here's what you don't see. Anyone born essentially after about 1970. When was the last time you saw someone quote a living philosopher? You probably haven't. We quote dead Romans about discipline and 19th century Russians about suffering, but contemporary philosophers get no quotes. Radio silence. Philosophy used to actually move the world. Voltaire's ideas sparked revolutions. John Stuart Mill shaped democracies. Rousseau changed how we think about childhood and education. These were public intellectuals whose ideas had consequences. But today, philosophy is an academic silo that talks to itself. And I'm going to show you exactly when and how it died. The Enlightenment Project ran on a very simple premise. Reason can solve problems. We can figure out how to live, how to organize society, and what makes life meaningful. And philosophy was the mother discipline. Everything from science to politics to ethics flowed from it. Philosophers were trying to answer the big questions that actually matter to human life. Then World War I happens. In 1916, the Battle of the Somme produces over 1.5 million casualties in 4 months. And when Sigmund Freud looks at this carnage, he writes something that poisons the entire philosophical project. He says, the irrational forces in human nature are so strong that rational forces have almost no chance against them. Think about what that does to philosophy. Because philosophy depends entirely on reason, and Freud just declared that reason is fundamentally impotent, that your conscious rational mind is just a window dressing for unconscious drives that you can't control. And if that's true, why bother with philosophy at all? You're just rationalizing instincts that you're not aware of. And Heidegger makes it worse. In 1927, he publishes Being and Time and declares that reason, which has been glorified for centuries, is actually the biggest obstacle to real thought. A philosophy professor at a major German university just told everyone to throw out logic and reason, and his alternative was to explore your feelings, to dwell in anxiety and seek into boredom until you essentially lose your grasp on reality. Let emotions guide you to truth instead of using your brain. In 20 years, two of the most influential thinkers in Western culture convinced everyone that the tools of philosophy don't work, that reason is impotent. And while that didn't necessarily help philosophy's case, it's not exactly what killed it. What killed philosophy is that philosophers stopped trying to help people. Just look at what happens after World War II. Saussure gives his famous lecture about existentialism. His 3 concepts: anguish, abandonment, and despair. That's what he's offering. Not how to live well, but how to survive in a meaningless universe. Camus writes about Sisyphus pushing a boulder uphill forever and says that you have to will yourself to imagine being happy about it. Now, this is philosophy at the mid-century. Not necessarily wisdom, but just coping mechanisms for the void. And when you compare that to ancient philosophy, Marcus Aurelius tells you to focus on what you can control and accept what you can't. Aristotle gives you a framework for developing good habits and practical wisdom. The Stoics hand you actual techniques that are useful for today: morning meditation, evening review, negative visualization. These are answers, clear, practical, actionable answers to the question of how to live. But modern philosophy, well, just try reading Heidegger. Try parsing through literally any modern philosopher without a PhD and 3 years of background reading. It's nothing but obscurity and fancy language that most modern people, are not willing to understand. If regular people can understand you, then you're not doing real philosophy. So, philosophy built a fortress of jargon and credentialism and locked itself inside. You need a PhD just to participate in the conversation, and hundreds of pages of context to understand a single paper. And even then, most academic philosophy is about increasingly tiny logical puzzles or deconstructing other philosophers rather than answering questions about how to actually live. The ancient texts are public domain, written for educated adults, not specialists with years of training. Modern philosophy made itself inaccessible by design. And meanwhile, all the practical questions that philosophy used to handle got outsourced. What makes people happy? Psychology and neuroscience can handle that. How should we organize society? Simple: economics, political science. What's real? Physics. How should I live? The self-help industry. Philosophy retreated into meta questions that nobody really cares about. Instead of just asking what justice is, philosophers ask the world, what does justice mean? And instead of asking what makes life good, they ask whether we can actually define good without circular reasoning. They gave up the territory and became commentators on language games. And people noticed. The hunger for wisdom did not disappear. People still want answers to big questions. And they're getting those answers from Jordan Peterson packaging ancient wisdom, from self-help gurus selling watered-down stoicism, and from political ideologies offering complete worldviews. Philosophy abandoned its post, and charlatans rushed in to fill the vacuum. All of the new philosophical questions are just old questions in modern dress. Is AI conscious? That's the ancient question about consciousness. Should we gene edit babies? That's the question about what makes life worth living. Do we live in a simulation? Even that is the ancient question about the nature of reality. And the sad part is that the tools for practicing useful philosophy are already there. We have virtue ethics, consequentialism, deontology, epistemology frameworks. We have political philosophy going back to Plato. But what we don't have is philosophers willing to actually use these tools to answer real questions. Because that's risky, and you might be wrong. Someone could criticize you. It's much safer to endlessly deconstruct and never commit to anything. But there is something worth salvaging. Both Freud and Saussure, for all their pessimism, were obsessed with responsibility. Freud said, you are responsible for your neurosis and your unconscious mind. Saussure said, you are responsible for creating yourself through your choices. So stop hiding behind God or society or even circumstances. And that is actually useful philosophy, something that people can apply. But the problem is philosophy succeeded at asking all the fundamental questions and then forgot to answer them. It got so good at questioning that it lost the ability to commit to positions. It became a machine for generating doubt instead of a metaphor for building wisdom. So, where do we go from here? Is philosophy even salvageable? Well, in order for it to be, philosophy needs to break out of the academic fortress. Stop writing exclusively for other academics. It's boring. And stop treating clarity as a sign of shallow thinking or deconstructing everything without actually building anything. Start answering questions. Say clearly what you think people should do and why. Risk being wrong or oversimplifying and being called not rigorous enough by gatekeepers who have made philosophy irrelevant to society. Right now, we have philosophy that is technically precise, but culturally impotent. We have ancient philosophy that is accessible, but a little limited by its historical context. And we have millions of people desperately trying to figure out the right way to live in a really crazy world. But they're getting their wisdom from podcasters and Twitter threads because philosophers won't talk to them. People are actually reading Marcus Aurelius because he tells them how to be disciplined. And they're reading Aristotle because he explains how to develop character. Modern philosophers could do this. They have more knowledge, better tools, and a deeper understanding of psychology and society. But they won't do it because the incentive structure of academia rewards obscurity and punishes practical application. Maybe we have asked all the fundamental questions. Maybe there really are no novel philosophical problems, just old problems in new contexts. But if that's true, then the job of philosophy should be applying our accumulated wisdom to those contexts and helping people navigate the new technologies, social arrangements, and global challenges using frameworks that we have spent millennia developing. Instead, philosophy chose irrelevance. It decided that being respected by other academics mattered more than being useful to humanity. And now, modern philosophers are confused and outraged that nobody outside of the academy cares what a philosopher thinks. Does philosophy actually have a place in the modern world? Of course it does. The questions that philosophy asks matter more than ever, like how we should organize society in an interconnected world. What obligations do we have to each other? And what makes life meaningful? Because, yes, that question is still relevant today. All of the questions are still relevant. And in a world that is so different from the ancient, maybe it's time that the new philosophers start answering those questions in today's contexts. So, with that said, thank you guys so much for watching. And as always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And I'll see y'all next time.